So the question right now is what comes next after this dramatic reversal of martial law? Joining us to discuss now is Michael Danagher in Ottawa. Michael was the Canadian ambassador to South Korea from 2018 to 2021, and he is joining us tonight on the Breaking News. Thank you so much for being here. South Korea has an unfortunate history of authoritarianism. How concerned are you watching today's events unfold?
Well, clearly this was an unprecedented event in what we would call the modern democratic history of Korea. And as your reporter mentioned, there have been previous impositions of martial law, but they've been under authoritarian government. So this is very much out of character for what was a fairly successful democracy in Northeast Asia.
Were you surprised by this, or did you see this potentially coming?
No, I mean, I guess if you know Korea, you know that martial law, similar to emergency powers in other countries, is part of the constitutional prerogative. But and certainly there have been a buildup of political tensions in South Korea. That's not necessarily new, but this step was. And I think the descriptions that were coming out of Seoul through the course of the day here in Canada, descriptions such as flabbergasted and amazed and astonished, I think those fit the situation very aptly.
What does a destabilized South Korea mean internationally?
Well, I mean, this is an episode which we hope is closing in on resolution. We know that there could be further consequences for the government there. Korea has been through an impeachment before, of course, quite recently, within the last 10 years. And that's all, I guess, part of the fabric that Koreans themselves will be dealing with. The implications for the region, of course, are serious. We have, of course, a peninsula that's shared with North Korea, who has been in the news recently for its involvement in the war in Ukraine. But the peninsula itself is quite fraught with tension. It never really has decreased, and we've seen the actions of Pyongyang. We can only suppose that things are not going to improve in any hurry, and of course the new Trump administration will bring additional uncertainties.
And what do you think the thought is in Pyongyang tonight, viewing all of this going on just to the south?
I think there's probably a mix of astonishment, but also some satisfaction. The narrative in North Korea tends always to be that democracy is a falsehood in the South. It's not a real democracy. It's still an authoritarian country dominated by big companies. So this fits into a narrative. Whether that's going to provoke North Korea or bring them down the road to doing anything more drastic, I would be doubtful there. I think there would be North Korea, if it is going to be aggressive, would prefer to do things on its own terms and is probably going to look at this very conservatively.
The president in South Korea said that, he was declaring martial law because there are some members of opposition parties that are North Korean sympathizers. Is there any evidence to that? And is that reaction warranted at all? I mean, is that the view of some, perhaps, South Koreans this evening?
It's not a personal view. I think there may be some conservative leaning elements in Korean society who look at certain institutions and say there seems to be a lot of sympathy for the North in those. I wouldn't say that's a widespread belief. And of course, President Yoon only had 19% support to him. But, to accuse the opposition, particularly the leftist opposition, of being sympathetic with North Korea is not a new thing, just as the left accuses the right to have been what they call the Jinilpa, the pro-Japan faction. And of course, Korea and Japan have their own long and fraught history. So political rhetoric is not very pleasant in Korea.
I got two last questions for you. One, how difficult do you think this is going to be for him to continue to hang on to power in the days ahead?
Well, his political capital was already quite low. It's a 5-year term. He lost decisively the National Assembly elections in April, and people were referring to his administration as lame duck. He clearly couldn't get much done. So it may be that there's a decision that this is in the best interest of the country to move on. Whether that's through impeachment or through some other mechanism, I won't speculate.
Canada has championed democracy on the world stage, including South Korea. What should our next steps be as we monitor this ongoing situation on the peninsula?
Well, we should, of course, ensure that our friends and allies in South Korea are living into the letter of the law. We seem to think the results of the day are a restoration of the rules-based order. And frankly, it seems President Yoon, his motivation with to call the martial law, whether we agree with it or not, it's not clear that it's unconstitutional, but equally so is the move by the National Assembly to force the recession of the martial law. That seems to be constitutional. So the rule of law seems to have been intact, but that doesn't mean that there's not going to be difficult days, weeks, even months ahead of us.
Okay, Michael, appreciate the time tonight and the perspective. That was former Canadian ambassador to the Republic of Korea, Michael Danagher. He joined us from Ottawa. Now, our next guest was in Korea just hours before martial law was declared. Tina Park joins me now from Oakville, Ontario. She is the founder and CEO of the Park Group, a global consulting firm focusing on international security. Thanks, Tina, for being here. As I said in the intro, you just left South Korea hours before this happened. Could you have, in your wildest imagination, predicted something like this?
No, not at all, Travis. They were still dealing with the remnants of the biggest snowfall they had in over 116 years. So Korea was already dealing with sort of weather-affected crisis when I left. And you couldn't have predicted any of this unfolding. I mean, it only happened 3 hours after I departed. So it was a shock to everybody, in fact.
It certainly was. The government has now, well, the president has now lifted this martial law declaration. What do you make of this most recent development?
Well, I think there are 3 takeaways. One is how quickly the lawmakers mobilized themselves to turn this down. The announcement came around 11 o'clock at night. And by 1 o'clock, you heard the votes, 190 people showing up and voting it down. So that was very quick at around 1 o'clock at night. And there was also massive mobilization of the Korean public. So I think, to get to the National Assembly in the middle of the night, you see certain resilience and really quick action on the part of the South Korean public. Thousands of them gathered to sort of voice their concerns about what was happening. And then you also see the shock in the international sort of market and countries around Korea. If you look at where Korea is in terms of geostrategic location of the Korean Peninsula, you're looking at China, Japan, and other countries, including North Korea, closely sort of surrounding what's happening on the Korean Peninsula, as well as the United States, which has, troops stationed in South Korea.
This came as a huge surprise to me when I saw it cross earlier this afternoon here in Canada. And I know a lot of international viewers probably aren't following all of the day-to-day details of domestic politics in South Korea. The president said that he had to do this to thwart anti-state forces. So zoom out for us, and for an international audience, just explain kind of domestically the situation that President Yoon is dealing with here and what really prompted him, at least in his opinion, to do this.
Well, what President Yoon Suk-yeol has been dealing with is an incredible lack of popularity within South Korea and the difficulties he had in passing any bills and the scandals surrounding especially his wife. So domestically speaking, he was in a very fragile position, but none of that justifies imposing martial law, because the last time martial law was imposed was when dictator Park Chung-hee was assassinated, and you really needed some semblance of order because there was no, political figure to lead the country. This is not the case, and there was also no serious threat posed by North Korea. So to say that, he was in a position to impose martial law unilaterally like that is really questionable.
So that doesn't carry any weight with you, that he's saying that, some of these parties are sympathizing with North Korea. Tell me about that, and also how this is playing out with the South Korean people.
Exactly, Travis. So I don't think it is in North Korean interest, and I'm talking both about the regime and North Korean public, to see South Korea crumbling. They are certainly at war because, how the Korean War ended is a stalemate. But it's not like North Koreans wish for the collapse of South Korean economy, because instability in South Korea would also have ramifications. So nobody wants South Korea to collapse, particularly because we're still dealing with a lot of, economic issues since the COVID pandemic, and because of what's happening in Ukraine and elsewhere. So to blame North Korean forces, it really doesn't make a lot of sense. And the South Korean public, some of them lived through actual period of martial law, and how much, destruction it could cause in terms of individual freedom, and the damage it causes to democracy and rule of law in a state. So the Korean public is certainly against any form of martial law unless it was absolutely necessary. So what they're saying is that President Yoon violated the Constitution, and what he did by imposing martial law was not only illegal, but also unconstitutional.
So do you see him remaining as president, or do you see him being put into a position where he's forced to resign? I know that, he is facing increased calls to do just that, to resign or to be impeached.
Personally, I think anything is possible. There is no appetite in the Korean public to see him in power any longer. So there are calls for resignation, there are calls for impeachment, or even arresting him. So the South Korean public is absolutely against him, and his own party has also abandoned him, and they are certainly not approving of what he did. So it is, to be seen what happens in South Korea, but I don't think he has a very long time left in power.
Okay, Tina, we have to leave it there for tonight. Appreciate your analysis on this. That is Tina Park, who is the founder and CEO of the Park Group, a global consulting firm focusing on international security.